All right, thanks very much, everyone, for coming. I think we'll get started. We'll actually be the first ones to get started as things running a little bit behind. I'm very happy to have two distinguished panelists here. The topic of this panel is a quick comparison between the US and the European market. So let me introduce the panelists. On the far left, Steve Milo, and I don't think he needs much of an introduction. He's probably one of the most well-known speakers on the vacation rental circuit, founder and CEO of VTrips. And then to my left is Mark Hudson, a local property manager here in London and running agents. So what I'd like to do is start with very short introductions by Steve and by Mark, and then we'll dive straight into the heart of the matter, like differences between the US and Europe, differences between a vacation rental manager, traditional vacation rental manager, which is what Steve focuses on, and an urban manager, and then also leave plenty of time for your questions. Let's get started. Steve, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. I mean, I just spoke. So Steve Milo with VTrips. I founded the company back in actually 2006. We have 2,000 properties under exclusive management. I know that in Europe that's a little bit of a distinction. And we've grown. We're now in 19 markets throughout North America, and we've used technology to drive that growth.
Cheers, Steve. Hi, everyone. I'm Mark Hudson from the Air Agents, one of the company's co-founders. So we, Air Agents, very different business from what you just heard from Steve. We've been around, we're very much the new kids on the block in this market. We've been around for 2.5 years, and we operate just in London. So, you know, if it's something you're aware of, London's a very, very high growth sector for the vacation rental industry. People are really just seeming to wake up to the kind of possibilities of sort of letting out their home or indeed corporates optimizing revenue from an asset in London, which is in very high demand. So we've been around for less than 3 years. We have about 260 properties under management, and that's from a standing start of one, which you know, we didn't start with a huge amount of seed funding, really just me and my co-founders sort of running around London doing it all ourselves. So very different business from you guys, but we're sort of got interesting times for us as well and growing quickly.
Thank you. Let me jump straight into it. Let me start with Steve. I think the two of you are about as different as it could be. Steve works in very, very traditional markets, sort of the Florida market, traditional vacation rental markets, while you are in a very high growth market. So let me take the bull by the horn and talk about growth. Steve, you've said that there's tons of growth in demand, but the big issue is supply growth. So you are sitting in markets where, due to a number of different factors, your supply is actually shrinking. How is this going to affect your business, and what are you doing about it?
Yeah, so give you some context here. We're in the North American market. We're particularly in the Sun Belt oriented areas, and we've seen in our areas supply retract. We've seen that from a number of factors. First, we've seen natural disasters take care of some supply, take it out of commission, in some cases permanently. We've had fires, we've had hurricanes. We've also seen the housing recession pretty much stop any new development of vacation rental inventory in North American resort markets since 2006, 2007, so almost a decade. And the last thing is, we had a number of owners of ours that were baby boom owners who were buying these properties to eventually retire in them. And they're retiring now. I mean, they're literally retiring. So every year that goes by, we're getting termination letters from owners who are telling us they're taking possession of the property because they're literally moving to Florida full-time to retire. And the housing market in the Sun Belt in North America is robust. So there's been price appreciation. People are selling. New owners, in some cases, are buying. So we are seeing definitely inventory retraction. So the question is, you know, why are we still in the resort market? Why are we still there? I actually think that the resort market in North America has the best long-term opportunities. And the reason why it has the best long-term opportunities in North America is because the moat is wider and the walls are higher and thicker, which means it's harder for competition to come in, and it's harder for competitors come in and easily scale these formidable obstacles, which is why there's really only a handful of platforms in North America that have succeeded. And we have actually been able to build a platform that works amazingly well in that resort market. And we've been able to do it in a capital efficient manner, which means we've been able to be profitable. We've been able to use traditional bank financing to grow M&A. But what I think I'm most excited about is that we're well positioned to start to work with developers to get new inventory built in those resort markets. I mean, the numbers just work so well in those markets. So I believe that inventory will begin to build again. And I believe that the walls, the moats, all those things put us in an enviable position of being able to scale in a very tough market that I think will have some pretty significant growth over the next 10 years due to new inventory.
Let me try something really tricky and actually disagree with you on this one. So I think you're taking a very interesting perspective. You're saying yours is the more interesting part of the business because, as you said, the moat is wider and the walls are taller. I think most of the industry would look at people like Mark and air agents as the sexy part of the industry. He's grown from 1 to 220 properties or so in a short period of time. It's the urban markets that are high growth. Mark, why don't you make the argument why you're the more attractive business?
Sure, okay. Like I said, we're very different types of businesses. So something I found coming to the first conference I came to in the industry was the VRMA Europe in Amsterdam last year. And it was a real eye-opener because having started the business, been going for a year, self-funded, and I think at that point we were on about 30 properties, so we're chugging along quite nicely. But sort of coming to the conference last year, talking to people in the industry, and it really opened our eyes thinking, well, hang on a minute, there's a established industry here. A lot of people have been doing this for 20 years, and their entire sort of outlook on the industry is completely different from mine, completely different. So a lot of people were sort of beating up on platforms like Airbnb, on the OTAs, and we were there thinking, what are you talking about? This is, Airbnb is fantastic. It's sort of a vehicle for young people, millennials, younger travellers to sort of come to London at kind of low cost, and it's the market for the urban rental space is absolutely booming. So we saw nothing but opportunity and partnership with platforms like Airbnb. So I guess kind of fundamentally we have a very different outlook from a lot of the sort of traditional established players in the industry, which does separate us. But all I can talk about, I don't know sort of whether or not we're the sexier part of the industry or not, but all I can talk about is my experience, which is nothing but opportunity. There is an enormous amount of property in London, and people are just waking up to it as being a vehicle for to make a little bit of extra money on the side to help pay for their holidays, for example. I think our original sort of first advertising campaign was pay for your holiday whilst you're on the beach, which is a really cool idea, of course. But sort of as we've matured and as our kind of sector in the urban markets matured, we've started partnering up with corporates. So we have a partnership with London's biggest estate agent. They have 20,000 properties, which they in their lettings business at any time. So this is all new. This is all new stuff. We were the first in London to have a partnership with a big corporate estate agent. And obviously property in London is incredibly in demand, incredibly just under demand from different investors in the world. And they haven't built enough property in London for the last 30, 40 years. The government's target is to double the number of new homes they built last year. I believe it was about 30,000 in London, so they've released a white paper saying they're going to build 60,000. So it just gives you an idea of what's going on in this city, and from my perspective, it's just nothing but opportunity and growth. So it's really interesting times, like I said.
Let me jump in. There's one huge advantage that Steve has over you, which is, number one, he's 10 times bigger than you, and number two, he's known for being one of the best process managers in the industry, like really institutionalizing processes and doing that at scale. Steve, what lessons do you think can the sort of fast growth urban managers learn from your deep experience?
Well, I mean, again, I'm not familiar with some of the smaller managers. You know, we can read the public reports, you know, in companies like One Fine Stay and see that they lost tens of millions of pounds, you know, doing this business in urban. We've been profitable from day one. Every single year we've been profitable. We've been so profitable that we've been able to borrow commercial debt. We've never given away equity. So we've run an extremely profitable business. So we're not subsidized by venture funding, and we're not subsidized in a manner where we're trying to run a business at the expense of profit and those things. You know, the lessons that I would say to everybody in this room is run a profitable business first before you start to scale. And it may sound like an obvious comment, but I think there's people even in this room, you know, earlier, who think that the key is to go out, raise a bunch of money, use people's money, and just grow. I mean, that's, you know, you could spend 5-10 years and have nothing to show for it at the end. You're better off, before you even raise money, run a efficient business. So how do we do that? Well, one of the things we've done is we've used hosted systems. We have not built proprietary systems. So one of the big costs that everybody would have is if you were going to go out and start to fund software development, it'd be a huge CapEx expense. We've instead used hosted systems and then taken APIs to layer and interwork with those hosted systems to build the type of process that we want. And the other thing we've done, the one system we have built is our own CRM, Customer Relationship Management System, but that is relatively cost-efficient use of funds in the spectrum of things. So we do run our own website with our Customer Relation Management System, and we store data, and we do our email triggers and all of the direct bookings there, because that's the sticky part of your property management side. But the rest of the things, like building a database system or building an accounting system or building a lead management system or building an owner portal or a guest payment portal or a contract portal. I mean, we have so many different hosted systems we've outsourced. And when you outsource and use hosted system, you can do it for a fraction of the cost. So that would be really one tip I would give everybody to build and create a profitable business.
Maybe I'm trying to sort of drive a little bit of difference here. Steve's well known of being a huge fan of the OTAs, right? Not exactly. So you've been sort of at the forefront of the industry's criticism of what the OTAs can improve on. Mark, I think yours is a much more symbiotic relationship with the OTAs.
Yeah.
Would love to hear your perspective, sort of both of your perspectives, and I sort of know the details of what you, Steve, disagree with, like on how the OTAs are running their business, but would like to sort of hear from you, Mark, where do you see symbiosis, where do you see opportunity for growth, and then sort of hear a rebuttal from Steve on that.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, like I said, I mean, I was an Airbnb guest. Sorry, can you hear me right now? I was an Airbnb guest and an Airbnb host years ago. So I guess kind of coming into the business through that route indirectly. Perhaps some of you are aware that they've opened up things in the last year and a half to work more directly with property managers. It's a new thing for them. So I think there's a bit of sort of finding their way through what works, and same with us. So we've done things with them, such as looking to. I've got to. I can't sort of say everything kind of in what's in scope, but there's tens of thousands of potential leads, which sort of Airbnb have in urban markets, which they can use to sort of incentivize to talk about property managers and people sort of using a property manager to help them out. And there's all kinds of benefits with Airbnb Plus as well, for example. So where we see ourselves in the market, we're not a One Fine Stay, which would be, I guess, a 5-star plus service. We're not like something like an Air Sorted, which are kind of a sort of more budget operator. We're sort of four-star plus kind of service. So we're certainly not the cheapest, but we're all about quality and guest experience. we are growing very, very quickly, but it's really about sort of keeping the guest experience as paramount. And if you do that our brand very much and clearly closely aligns with Airbnb, because I guess they're all about the guest experience and quality. So we're working hard to, I guess, raise the bar. With that being a big issue on Airbnb, I guess you never quite know what you're going to get. So them working with us, we solve a big problem for them. Not just host fatigue, which would be sort of individual hosts doing it themselves and realizing it's too much hard work, but also just raising the quality across the board. So we have a 200-point check that we have whenever we take on a new property. Before it goes live with us, we're in there 3 times, typically, before we approve it to go live. So it's kind of all about that, and like I said, it's all about sort of millennials having an amazing experience. In London, we tell them about the local independent coffee shops, the local bars, the restaurants. So it's all about that kind of experience, which I guess a lot of the speeches today, some of the speakers have talked about experience-based travel, and that's kind of where the really interesting sort of, as the world opens up and travel becomes more available to more people, that's kind of where, you know, a lot of the opportunity is. So we very closely align ourselves with, I guess, what Airbnb was originally all about. That's why it's a natural thing for us to have a close relationship with them.
So what percentage of your bookings come from Airbnb?
At the moment, more than 90%. Which again, if you talk to most of the established people in the industry, they'll look at you, look at me as if I'm absolutely balmy for having that. But what can I say? You know, we're the new kids on the block, and hey, maybe us challenging the old established ways of doing things. Maybe we are doing it completely wrong, or maybe we've got an interesting new perspective on this market. And you know, working with a Airbnb $35 billion partner, maybe sort of working closely with them is a good strategy, and maybe there's a lot of opportunity there for us.
So to sum up, Steve, what Mark's saying is, he's like, okay, I rely on Airbnb. It's 90% of my bookings, but there's tens of thousands of more potential listings they can send my way, so I'm not too worried about it. What do you say to that strategy?
Is that 90% of your overall revenue or 90% of your OTA revenue?
90% of our overall revenue, yeah, there or thereabouts.
I mean, that's Russian roulette. That's Russian roulette right there. So, you know, my topic was the real truth of OTAs. It wasn't that, it was pros and cons, right? So I have positive things to say, I have negative things to say. OTAs make up 40% of our revenue. And that 40% then is split up among a number of different channels. And we're actively looking to continuously diversify our channels. And we're actively, will be participating whenever Google is ready in some beta tests. So I'm all about being extremely realistic, about not putting all of our eggs in one basket. So 40% of our revenue comes from OTAs. That means 60% does not come from OTAs. So that 60% percentage comes from pay-per-click, and a percentage comes from direct to our website, which is generated by significant email campaigns. You know, look, if you feel good and you know, are drinking Airbnb Kool-Aid, there's nothing I'm going to tell you not to continue to drink the Kool-Aid. I don't trust Airbnb at this point because I've seen signs that they would rather do business directly with the owner of the property than with you once you get to a certain size. They may be forced to deal with us, but I'm not sure that's what they really want to do. So I would just tell each of you, it's unhealthy to have that level of revenue in one channel partner, and you could go out of business very quickly if that relationship changes.
Let me jump in here quickly. I think we've drawn out some of the differences between the two of you where you're very different. I think there's also some significant similarities between the two of you. I think both of you are known as property managers that are operationally extremely competent and that focus on process management and invest into technology to manage process management. Why do you think, how much of a competitive advantage do you get from that, and why do you think is it important?
Sure. So starting 2-3 years ago with mostly enthusiasm and spreadsheets, running around London pretty stressed out because the linen hadn't been dropped off there, or the boiler had gone over in Kilburn or something. So that's kind of the base we started on. So we had to learn. We had to learn about what systems are out there. We didn't build our own technology at that point because we didn't have any money to do so. So we had to look sort of out there in the market and see what systems there were that we could utilise to help us run our business. So using systems like Properly, we found to be, I'm not going to big you up too much, Alex, but very helpful.
It was entirely unprompted.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. So very helpful indeed for allowing us to scale and manage our operations because we didn't have the money to build it ourselves. And other PMS systems as well. So those PMSs have got the API integrations. As we've scaled and as we've taken a bit of investment, and we've been able to look at sort of what bits of our sort of operational chain we can focus on, and we can get some efficiencies and cost savings. We've actually honed in on things like the onboarding side of the business. So if anyone who's ever set up an Airbnb listing, I'm sure many of you have, we've broken it down. There's about 260 different fields to that onboard. So it takes a long time. If you're going to do a good job, which is obviously what it's all about, it'll take about 3 or 4 hours. So we've built some systems to automate that down to about 15 minutes, which allows us, particularly with the corporate market, actually, people that have a building with 100 units. If that 100-unit building was just launched today with a strategy of filling it up with traditional short lets and long lets, then typically after 3 months, that building, 70% of it would still be empty. So you've got 70 units in that 100-unit building which are empty for the first 3 months. So us being able to be incredibly nimble and build that, onboard that level of units is a big advantage, and it helps us add incremental revenue to that corporate. So that's kind of systems on that side of the business is what we're focusing on, but certainly using sort of the best of what's out there at the moment. We do that. Going forward, we're going to be looking at sort of other cost savings and other efficiencies, but at the moment that's kind of what's in scope for us to allow us to grow.
Steve, you're known as a property manager that's extremely sophisticated around automation, around smart home implementations. What's your secret sauce?
Okay, well, try not to drag this too far into the weeds here, but so. We manage 2,000 properties. It starts off with having a centralized database. So having a centralized database is we're on one PMS system, property management system. From that property management system, then we're able to support API feeds with what I would call operational partners. So in this case, Smart Lock is a critical component of our growth period. So much so that we are paying for the locks. So that's a CapEx expense. We own the locks, but we're putting these smart locks and the controllers in every property. And the reason is because we gain tremendous efficiency by going away from manual check-ins, going to remote check-ins, allowing the guest to go there, being able to control the cleaners through modules that manage the cleaning on top of the smart home and the controller, having HVAC controllers in place that manage the cleaning experience. And we can also control access for service personnel. So if all of a sudden you start to think about these things, you can really gain operational efficiency out of your organization through utilizing smart locks, home automation, in terms of managing your cleaners, your service personnel, your guest check-in, and then it also creates a more consumer-centric experience. So that's just one example of automation which improves the guest experience, and also ultimately over time, although it's a CapEx expense, it saves us labor.
See, if I can put you on the spot, if you had to choose between two, if I ask you what are you better at, are you better at marketing or are you better at operational management? Which one would you pick?
Well, I mean, I'm a marketer, so my background is direct-to-consumer marketing, and then I migrated to e-commerce. I got into operations because I started owning vacation rentals, and I started to actually self-manage them. So I learned the cleaning, I learned the maintenance, and all the different operations. But I'm not, my love is not operations. What I really get jazzed about is marketing and usability and conversion funnels and things like that. So, to answer your question, we're better at marketing, but we try extremely hard on the operational side.
So if I can paraphrase Simon Lehman from last year's VRMA Europe in Amsterdam, I think, Simon, you said something along the lines of if you as a property manager are hoping to differentiate or build a brand in the middle, good luck to you. How would you respond to that?
Well, I mean, I think Simon's right. I mean, I see him back there. Plug for Simon. Look, we don't believe it's very easy to build a brand in this market of gorillas and powerhouses. Now, interestingly enough, that doesn't mean you give up, right? So it doesn't mean you just say, well, there's no hope. So one of the things we did, actually, is we changed our names on January 1st from Vacation Rental Pros to V-Trips. And the reason why we went to V-Trips was a myriad of reasons, but one was that it was going to help us in some ways with branding, and at least because mobile becomes such a big part of it, it's much easier to type in V-Trips. It's much more memorable, and then we create this kind of umbrella component. So what I would tell each of you is don't give up on your brand, but don't focus so much of your resources on the brand that it's at the detriment of other areas. I mean, at the end of the day, because I don't, whether the OTAs will even allow you to continue to use brands or not, your properties, your reviews, the content, the photos, the captions, the headlines, the configurations of the amenities in those feature sets really become the critical component which separates you from your competitor. It allows you to get conversion where others won't. So one of the tips that he gave is, the checklist they have for configuration of Airbnb. We do the same thing with some of the other channels as well. And, that's far more important than obsessing over your brands or obsessing over the welcome package or obsessing over, little things you give out at your office to your guests, like little bags of tea or whatever. I mean, you may think this is fantastic. I look at that as a money that could be cut and saved for future.
So I think it's a really interesting juxtaposition. Steve, what I hear you say is, yes, it's very hard to win this game, but I'm never going to stop trying because I'm never going to be reliant on a platform. What I hear you say, Mark, is there's someone here who's got billions of dollars of capital who's going to send me leads and leads and leads. I'll outsource my marketing to them and I'll be perfectly happy with it, and I'm just going to be operationally really, really good, and I'm not going to be displaced.
Sure. That's pretty much nailed it. In terms of kind of marketing and in terms of marketing to generate interest and drive bookings, we don't have to do it. It completely takes that away, completely strips out all that cost because we have a $34 billion organization doing that with us. Of course, we have to, and we've sort of got much, much smarter in the last year, especially since partnering up with some corporates in how we generate bookings on Airbnb. So, whether or not that's from sort of optimizing the listing copy itself, from optimizing the photos, from staging the photos, doing all these things to really make a very eye-catching listing. So that's kind of what it's all about for us, not having to do that external marketing. But I guess the other point is something that a change that seems to be happening as well as Airbnb opens up to working with property managers like ourselves. We have our own co-host account on Airbnb. Originally, you were limited to having 10 properties on there, but with our partnership with them, we have all of our properties on that co-host account. So we have our own brand within Airbnb, and this is very new. This is a month, 2 months old, but it seems kind of that's the way that that they've opened up, and that's something that they are looking to build, and it makes perfect sense. To have a brand on Airbnb, you can build something there, and you can build sort of something whereby guests can click on your page on Airbnb and they can search all your properties, and they know that they know the experience they're going to get, they know the quality they're going to get. They might know, for example, we do use welcome boxes. You can generate loyalty from guests from using those kind of things. So again, so something really interesting that's happening, and something that we definitely chosen to be a part of, and we'll see where it goes. We'll see who's right, but or who's got the right kind of perspective. But it's kind of interesting for us, and it's opened a lot of new opportunities working in that way.
I have a tough question for you. So obviously most of your traffic comes from Airbnb. Like if there's a couple of people from Booking.com in the room here, if they came to you and you started significantly working with them, do you think the love from Airbnb would die? Is there a wink, wink, nudge, nudge saying, hey, we'll treat you nicely, just don't deal with the competition?
Sure.
Or maybe less of a, more of a wink, wink, nudge, nudge?
Sure. I mean, I think that the reason that when we started working more closely with Airbnb, I think we were coming at it from a level of having the vast majority of our bookings on Airbnb, so it really wasn't a big deal to sort of work more closely with them. It would be a big deal if we had 10 different OTAs, 10% of all our bookings coming from all of them. So we were coming at it we were perfectly positioned to partner up, firstly. But as I've said to Booking.com a couple of times, and I hope there are some people from there in the room, because we've talked to them, and our corporate partners need a certain level of guest vetting, and that's something that sort of Airbnb is so much stronger on. The verified ID, the review-based system, also the payments as well. 100% of payment up front on Airbnb. It's very hard to have a conversation with a corporate partner and tell them that sort of those things, the vetting and the payments aren't sorted. So their model sort of works for us, and it strips out a load of operational headache and cost as well, sorting the payments. So it just kind of works well for us. And certainly if Booking.com did nail that market, then we might have to have more of a close look at it. But perhaps in some senses I'm being quite naive here, because obviously they are an enormous brand, and they're fantastic at generating bookings. For service departments, which is a market we've entered as well, we do partner up with Booking.com on those, because it is more about yield and it is more about generating that revenue. But if you're looking after a Londoner's home for a few weeks a year, that person is going to be much more comfortable with the level of vetting on Airbnb. And that is quite a big segment of our revenue as well. So we're just looking after people's family homes, and the vetting is such a big deal when it comes to that.
Let me sort of shift gears a little bit. So I know this is an argument, like I asked both of you beforehand, the more and more the listing platforms, it becomes a closed loop. So you don't own the relationship with the guest anymore, they do. In your case, Mark, you said you don't hugely care about that. That's all right with you, because you let them do the marketing and you just focus on being operationally great and developing or maintaining a strong relationship with them, and you take your risk. I think Steve would take a very different view on that. There's a number of smart home technologies that are emerging, like we talked about over the last few days in Paris. We talked about sort of the artificial intelligence and the voice-based assistants like Alexa that allow you to sort of deliver a whole new series of guest services at the home that can be, number one, monetized, but number two, can also allow you to establish a direct relationship with the guest, re-establish a direct relationship with the guest on the premise that you have exclusive control over. Steve, if I can ask the question to you. So if you get in bed with an Amazon, for instance, that delivers all of those services sort of as to counteract the 800-pound gorillas of the listing platforms, are you moving from good to worse or from bad to worse, in that you're actually now dealing with someone who is a much bigger competitive threat, or do you see that as a strategic move to counteract the power of the listing platforms in the short term?
I mean, look, all I can tell you is we leverage all of these players against each other. We will never let ourselves be too dependent on one channel or one supplier without really thinking through the options and what's in our best interest. We will never work with a company that actively disintermediates our guests from us. We want their information. We want to own the guest. We want to be able to follow up. We want the relationship to be between us and the guest, not between the guest and the platform. Long term, we'll pay the OTAs some money to give us that first guest. In terms of Amazon, you know, and in terms of technology in general, we tend to look at pieces being agnostic. So if we head down the road to putting in controllers into units, which we will likely do, Amazon Echo controllers, we will set it up. So yes, we're looking forward to it. I mean, I think there's a lot to be said about having a concierge level service that's voice activated in every unit, every home, every condo, every apartment, that, you know, that literally the first thing that happens when the guest enters is a voice greets them and asks them if it can help them, and asks them to rebook for next year, and all of the things that we would want. Ask them if they'd like to get any tour information. I mean, these are things that Airbnb is not going to like to hear. I mean, if Airbnb had 90% of my inventory or my revenue, they would not like me to be talking about how I'm going to cut them out of experiences. But their experiences don't do anything for me. I'm interested in a company that'll give me a revenue share, an affiliate of that relationship back, where we get a piece of that revenue, not just 100% to Airbnb. I don't believe in just giving out of the goodness of my heart all the revenue to an OTA. It's got to be a two-way street. The other thing that I believe that Amazon has is the ability with Prime to allow delivery of groceries and other supplies to the guest, either at arrival or right after arrival. And we can even upsell them before they come. So, you know, the counter to that would be, what if Amazon becomes the next 800-pound gorilla? And my answer is, well, then we go to Google. Then we go to Amazon competitor, because their technology Amazon may be a very good e-commerce platform, and they certainly, many would argue, have the best ability for this industry. But that doesn't mean that if they become abusive and they try to squeeze us out, which I'm not sure how I'd necessarily see that happening. But if they did for some reason, then we would pick someone else, because we own the exclusive relationship with the owner. We'd simply replace the controller. I mean, that's what we would do. I mean, if you're just looking at things of how I realistically think, I think, okay, if you try to take too much from me, we will just eliminate you and we'll work with someone else, your competitors. That's how I think.
Mark, to close off on that topic, I think the trend at the beginning has been towards open ecosystems. Sort of Amazon integrates with everyone, so any smart home technology that you want will work with Amazon, will also work with Google. I think what we're seeing now is things are starting to take very different shape. Amazon now has Amazon Keys, and we'll see how long they'll start supporting other smart locks. They also just acquired Ring and spent $1 billion on that. So it's sort of very clearly there's an Amazon-specific ecosystem taking shape. The same thing on the Google side, like they acquired Nest. So like both of them now have their own sort of smart home ecosystem. Do you see this as a long-term threat, or do you see it as an opportunity? Things are going to work together better and like get cheaper, or the sort of what Steve just mentioned, the interoperability is going to go away and you'll have to choose sides.
Sure. I most definitely see smart home technology as an opportunity, because having been there for guest check-ins and having done meet and greets, even though we've grown quickly, sort of everyone in our company does a guest check-in at least once a month, and it really sort of kind of brings you back to what you're trying to achieve, and brings you back to people that are on holiday, perhaps have a holiday of a lifetime, something they might have saved up for a long time. So if there is a tablet there, which we do put in properties, or if there's a Amazon Alexa there, which we put in some properties as well, they love it. They think it's cool. So for that millennial traveler, if you're combining experience and you're combining sort of that an interesting space, a unique space, and that kind of local knowledge with technology, that's something compelling. That's a product that is compelling, especially compared to sort of where a lot of the market is at the moment. A lot of Airbnbs, you know, you're just not going to get that. So that's sort of how we view it. It's an opportunity, and I guess it kind of ties in with us building our own brand on Airbnb. We really don't rely at this point on having a lot of repeat bookings, and again, not placing a huge emphasis on that is probably something that a lot of the established industry would say we're wrong at. But you know, that's what Airbnb allows us to do, because the market's so big and their reach is so big. You know, we don't have to play that game of trying to advertise, you know, in Asia and trying to get bookings. So we don't have to do that. We can just focus on the guest experience, and if we nail that, which is what we work very hard at doing, then we can build a brand within Airbnb, and people will come back to us from there. So we just see it as something that enhances the guest experience. I mean, whether or not it's Amazon or, you know, Alexa or Google or whatever, it doesn't really concern me too much. It's just whatever the guest is going to react most favorably to.
I think it was fascinating in that the two of you have obviously diametrically opposed strategies, but both have been very, very successful at your game. So there's clearly a path, like there's different ways to get there. Wanted to open up questions to the audience. Who wants to start? Simon.
Questions for Steve. Obviously, you know, you've been the topic in Paris, and I moderated a OTA panel, and I had a bit of a discussion about you before we started the panel. And the question to you is, what would you do if all 4 OTAs will refuse to work with you, number one? Because you said that, you know, this is 20 million revenue, it's a lot, and they could do that. How would you react?
Well, just 1 second, I need to repeat the question so it's recorded. So the question is, Steve, what would you do if all 4 OTAs would stop working with you?
Well, I mean, first, that's an extremely hypothetical question, because, you know, they have terms of service, and the bigger those companies are, the more they have to adhere to the terms of service, because, you know, that's how you have class action lawsuits. I think one of the more interesting thing is what's happened over at HomeAway when they started talking about doing subscriptions, and they were going to do this matchback, and they were going to use automated offline attribution for their HomeAway software clients, and they were going to use other clients had the ability to pick and choose. And, you know, look, I'm not a lawyer, but I believe there was some Expedia lawyers that got involved on this and said, look, you can't do disparate treatment. And so what you're saying, Simon, would be something like disparate treatment and collusion, which would be probably not a real good thing for publicly traded companies to be talking about. But even so, we certainly would do everything possible to work with Google, and then we have our own database of guests, and, you know, we just email the heck out of them, and we'd probably go back to hiring more reservation agents and doing more outbound, which is the way. I mean, we started off in 2014, only less than 1% of our revenue came from OTAs, and right now it's 40%. So in theory, if all 40% went away, it would be not the best thing if it all happened at one time, but, you know, 40% split among 8 or 9 different OTAs is a lot different than 90% on one OTA.
Yeah.
Other questions? Oh, sorry.
Just to comment quickly. I mean, so 1% of your revenue was on OTAs in 2014, and then so
40% now.
40% now. I mean, to me that just shows kind of where the demand is. Like, you know, the demand is via OTAs, and I don't know which one or where you get most of your bookings from, but, you know, it just shows that, you know, that the guests have made their choice, and, you know, I don't see the sort of the reason to fight that. I mean, why not use an OTA as a partner, and instead of getting a big chunk of your revenue from a company that you don't like? That's, you know, my opinion, but working with someone for me is there's a lot of advantages in that.
Steve, you wanted to?
Well, look, I mean, we're all in this for business reasons. I mean, I don't consider any of the OTAs to be enemies. I consider them to be business channels, And in some cases, some of them are very good channels, and some are not very good channels. You know, the good thing about the business we're in, there is just far more demand than supply, okay? And because there's far more demand than supply, that means that the people like me and the people like you have far more leverage than you probably even imagine in terms of being able to leverage the OTAs. And I think what's important for each of you to think about with these channels is, you know, first and foremost, you know, when we look at Google as a percentage of what our cost is, and then we weight it against the OTA. So in certain markets we can do more Google, we will do more Google, in other markets we won't. But with the OTAs, you know, we pick and choose the OTAs based on the cost and based on the performance. And I mean, that's how you should run a business. My opinion, I mean, look, you know, this thing is going to continue to evolve. I think there's going to be more niche OTAs that are going to spring up. There is a cost of capital to working with each of them because initially it's painful and there's definitely upfront resources, but it's in your best interest to diversify. And today we probably have 12 OTAs that, you know, provide some material income, and I'm hoping in 2 years that number will be 20 or closer to 30. We're going to continue to diversify. We're going to continue to do what we think will not only leverage our ability to reduce our risk, but also leverage our ability to get better cost. Because when you have competition and when you have more demand than supply, that means that you can dictate or at least get concessions. And so I would challenge each of you to spend the time to build relationships so that you put yourself in a better position where you're not vulnerable and you can get additional cost concessions.
More questions? Anyone?
Maybe just quickly to Mark, how scalable do you think your business is without losing the touch? But also from a financial perspective, give us a sense about how your profitability evolved when you started from like one property, came to like 250, and where do you see the sweet spot, you know, optimizing the financial side as well as the sort of the experience, the touch, without losing it?
Yeah.
So let me just really quickly repeat the question. The question is, how scalable do you think your business is, and can you continue to maintain the sort of personal touch? And then the second part of the question is, how did profitability evolve as you went from one property to 200?
Sure. We were profitable in our first year. I think by the end of the first year, we turned a very small profit, and we managed about 30 properties at that time. So, and that was, you know, us kind of running around without the benefit of economies of scale. So I think when you're operating in an urban environment, you do get those economies of scale. I often use the analogy, it's like running a hotel, but the hotel rooms are spread all the way around a big metropolis, big city. So it's a right pain in the arse, but if you have sort of multiple office hubs, that's something that we're kind of looking to build out to bring us those economies of scale. So I think kind of that's the path we laid out. In terms of actually scaling, you know, as I alluded to earlier on, there's so much opportunity and there's different strands. So I mentioned there's the service department strand, there is the homeowners strand, and that's kind of regular Londoners going on holiday, and that's something we're partnering up with Airbnb to drive that revenue element. There's estate agents as well within the city, and that's things like void periods, that's properties that are for sale, that are empty. And also there's the PRS element as well, so that's corporates that own lots and lots of buildings. So we're sort of going after those 4 different revenue streams, and they've each got their own problems, but there's lots of opportunities in each. But certainly, you know, as we grow, I think the opportunities there to sort of we get cost savings as well as the challenges of growing. So yeah, I mean that's probably kind of answers the question, I think. I mean, there's it depends sort of how it pans out over the next year, but you know, that's the path we laid out.
That was a great question. I'm worried that you're going to miss your
Let
wine
me ask
because
one
we're
thing
running
on
way
scale,
over.
and then we'll let everybody go. So, and I think, again, hopefully one thing you'll take away from this is diversification. So we're in 19 different markets, and that scale creates risk diversification. And I'm telling you, risk diversification, everyone in this room, if you have any type of net worth, you wouldn't put all your savings in one place, one stock. You would diversify. And the reason why you would diversify is because it's prudent and it creates a better risk diversification. So, you know, what happens? Natural disasters. We had 2 hurricanes in Florida. We had a big wildfire in Tennessee. But yet we had enough book of business where we were able to manage that risk. What else happens? Rental restrictions. Very serious situation happening in many, many cities throughout the globe. And you never know when rental restrictions can happen and start to take away your property rights or your owner's property rights. I was talking to someone in Paris about this, and it happened in a 5-year span where all of a sudden, really, you know, a number of property managers literally went out of business because, you know, they couldn't manage those properties anymore. So diversification is critical. And then, you know, when you go into multiple markets, different marketing channels are going to work differently. So, you know, take away, you know, diversification of your marketing, diversification of your marketing, of your markets. It's a smart way to make certain that the businesses you've all built sustain and grow for the future.
Very last question, Sebastian. I think you had a question. Let's please keep the answers to 30 seconds.
It had to do actually with the legal constraints, you know, literally like, you know, as you were saying, like it can take you out of business. I was thinking like, you know, London, obviously,
90
same
nights.
scale effects, challenges, good and bad. That can really tilt the balance one way or the other. So like, how are you facing that? You know, it might be different impact depending on your diversification or not.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, so if you're not aware, London has a 90 nights limit. Housing's very sensitive in London, so you're literally only allowed to do these sort of holiday lets or shorter term lets for a total of 90 nights per calendar year. I believe Paris is 120. I mean, it depends kind of where you're at with your business, because if you've built a business on sort of on your revenue streams on renting properties out for the whole year, then if the authorities turn around and say, well, you only get 90 nights, then that's going to look pretty dire for your business. I guess kind of timing-wise, we were lucky in a sense that the 90-day rule had been out for a little while, and we decided quite early on to, it sounds quite novel, but to not break the law or facilitate homeowners breaking the law. There are some people in London that have built a business, and quite a decent chunk of their revenue has previously come from renting properties out all year round. And that's a huge challenge for them to reorganise their business and restructure. I guess kind of we were slightly lucky in that sense. And, you know, as I said, we decided early to operate within the constraints of the local market. And the second thing we've done is we're one of the founder members of an industry association in the city. So we've decided to, as opposed to sort of ignoring or working against the regulation, we decided to do whatever we can to meet with enforcement teams, to meet with MPs, to engage with people that are having, you know, very real concerns. So, you know, we see ourselves as a potential solution to those concerns, to people having parties, to sort of rubbish, noise complaints. Those are all issues that we can help with. So that's the path we decided to sort of work with people and kind of operate within those constraints. There's a lot more than 30 seconds, I'm sorry.
That's quite all right. Thank you very much. I think there was a fascinating conversation. I think it was really interesting to see two sort of leaders from very, very different sides of the market, from across the 2 different sides of the Atlantic, but also see 2 very, very different strategies and how you can be successful with either kind of strategy. Thank you again. My name is Alex Nigg. I'm the founder of Properly, the operations system for the vacation rental industry. Thank you very much to the panelists, and thank you for attending.